Patrick, I visited your SDG week in the university 2 years ago, and I did an interview
Yeah.
with you. Did an interview with you then. Could you first of all remind our listeners of the interesting role you have and have had with the formulation and implementation of the UN SDGs?
Yeah. So my history with the SDGs is I've had a relationship with Professor Jeffrey Sachs in Columbia University, who has a role as a senior advisor, or special advisor to the UN General Secretary, both under Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and under Antonio Guterres. That's three general secretaries. But we had a role in terms of setting up what's called a global Masters in Development Practice, which trains the next generation of professionals for implementing the SDGs. But we also have this thing called the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which helped, had a mandate to actually proof the goals and the targets when we're in the post-2015 process. But now that we're in implementation stage, it's like a think tank for the General Secretary's area. So basically, one of the roles is working with UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network.
That's very interesting. I don't know if you know this, but I interviewed David O'Donoghue there about a year ago. So
Yeah.
I know the two of you have very important roles in the last few years. Could you tell us
Yeah.
could you tell us a bit about the history of SDG Week in the college and the kind of things you get up to?
Yeah. So in UCD we have a set of modules called discovery courses, and the idea here is that most students can do a couple of electives, two electives out of 12 courses every year. But discovery courses are for students to actually discover some major kind of global challenges across our research pillars. So, for example, the most important one to me, obviously, and everyone it should be, is climate change and global poverty and issues such as this. So, in UCD now, you can, as a student, you can take this discovery course on what we call the UN Global Goals, but it's actually an open learning course. So anyone in Ireland, actually in Dublin, can actually take this course and come in and do a course on the global goals. It has a couple of ambitions. One is they get lectures from all the, what I call the goalkeepers across UCD, who give lectures on what they do for the goals. And they tell them other electives they teach, pathways to masters, pathways to careers, to internships. I teach them all about the UN system and all the opportunities that are there. There's new entry points to actually get in talking to the UN. And finally, we do a thing called SDG Week, where you have to walk the talk at home. So we take the UCD campus, which is literally the size, like it would be the second biggest town in Ireland if it was a town, like 38,000 people. And we actually say, well, what can we do to map UCD in its estates and all its activities and functions into the SDGs? So SDG Week is when the students themselves, like this time, looking at ethical fashion, looking at plastics, looking at climate action policies, and so on. They actually set up a kind of a media desk, and they try to have influence and dissemination of this information around college, but they will write up a policy brief and send it to government, and they'll send it to the states in UCD to try and take more formal action on their ideas.
And do you have many? Go on, you gonna say something? Did you have many students doing the courses every year?
So it's around. It varies from 100 kind of to 150. It's, to me, we have a bigger capacity, and we are starting to think about embedding it in more kind of structural pathways. So, for example, when you come into UC now, there will be an offering where each year you can actually do the SDGs, but it's kind of building it into from year 1 to year 4, and actually get a minor or kind of get a certificate around that. And there is talk with the Earth Institute at the moment of actually having an open entry course where you do both science and social science courses that have the SDGs as a backdrop. Now, that mightn't start for a year or so, but you can watch that space as it develops.
So, when I was talking to you 2 years ago, I was under the impression, I think I was wrong, that UCD VO are involved in the week. They're not, though, are they not?
So, the thing about UCD at the moment is that, there's as I said, it's a huge community. The UCD VOs are involved in the SDGs in the sense that they would, they have an Irish Aid grant and they do sustainable development education, have their film series, etc. But when there was components of SDG Week here where we had our stalls, but then we had two extra things, which is we had an SDG advocate from the UN called Dr. Maravit, and she got a James Joyce Award. And we have an oceans movie today, actually, David Attenborough's film on plastic oceans. And what UCDVO there would do is that it would campaign for us. So they clearly came behind us this week, and they were retweeting and putting up on Facebook. But this was also true as what we call of Eco UCD. This is the Students' Union. They backed up a fashion swap on the basis of our ethical fashion this week. And then the computer guys have a thing called UCD for Sustainability, and they invited in a lot of companies. This is the idea of energy use and kind of how much carbon we create with backing up data on computer systems. And they had a big day yesterday as well. So actually just quite a lot of, let's call them, emerging and coherent groups that are emerging across college. And indeed, I think one of the biggest things that's happened in UCD is that the management team have set up a working group with the key sort of principals under Professor Colin Scott. And they have actually now work packages on mappings on education, research and engagement. And there's a permanent administrator on the SDGs. So what we're trying to do in UCD is all the great stuff that's happening across the academic side and the student side, we're trying to map them and put them into a central coordination. And then the key thing is for students and staff and for all partnerships we UCD start working together in a more coherent way. So we're on that road, and that there really is a high amount of energy that compared to when I talked to you a few years ago. I think, we've gone up a good few notches in terms of the activity and the coherence across UCD.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, how has the week this year changed compared to last year? I think you've already answered that question. Okay, a big question, Patrick. Are we witnessing any big positive results in relation to the implementation, do you believe, of the SDGs at a national and global governmental level and local level? Yeah, so there's some... So I talk about Ireland specifically. So compared to the time we talked, so UCD is a project with the Environmental Protection Agency on helping with what's called data for the SDGs, particularly on environmental indicators and on governance for the SDGs. And the one big thing that's happening, of course, is that we had a voluntary national review that reported to the UN last year. The government did. They've set up what's called a national stakeholder forum. And within that, there's a bit of an open space to innovate. And if you watch that space, I think there will be a youth forum present. I think there will be a science policy interface present. I think there will be the CSO presenting the SDG data. And then Coalition 2030 will have different projects for some society, particularly around sustainable development education. So the governance is starting to emerge. So the way the governance is there's an intergovernment working group that interfaces with what I call civil society and academic groups. And we're getting a good bit of traction. So, for example, Minister Saponi, we had what we call a whole of society approach looking at youth poverty in Ireland, which is very severe at the moment. 1 in 4 children suffer some form of youth deprivation largely due to housing insecurity. And all government departments and all elements of society and academia have to really be a bit more coherent and spend the few millions we have on this issue. We should spend it really quite cleverly and be coherent about the way we spend it and take an SDG approach. So I think we are seeing, at that kind of national government level and across different departments, the beginnings of something that wasn't there before, but it's there now. And that's good news. In terms of, what was the question? There was the implementation at a global level as well.
Yeah. So I think the way I'm looking at the moment is, so a couple of Andrew Jackson, who is our solicitor for the case, who's a UCD lecturer who's taught on discovery as well, and Saib O'Neill, they're taking the government to court. It's called the Climate Action Case, and we're waiting for, these are UCD academics, we're waiting for that decision to come. And in fact, next Tuesday at the College of Art and Design in Thomas Street at 12:30, there is a photo shot for people to show their support in anticipation of that decision. It's basically saying the Irish government, in a constitutional sense, are not doing enough to meet their obligations for climate action. So that's attacking what I call the jurisy side of the government. So the work we're doing with climate action, with the Department of Climate Change and Communications and Environment, is working on the bureaucratic side to try and make sure that the SDGs are implemented and pressures are implemented through that side. And of course, we've had the Citizens' Assembly as an example of that through our school, David Farrell in our school, which went to the Oireachtas, which came out with Naughton's report a couple of days ago. And we also obviously have Higgins, who's a big SDG advocate, so he's more on that side of government. But I guess the real problem is our legislators. I mean, we've got to vote in different types of people, who parliamentarians or TDs are, that would take this more seriously, because obviously they seem to play to the big interests of the financial side, the multinationals and the farmers, and they're not playing to the interest of society and environment at large. So we have a big job to make sure our legislators listen to the momentum that's coming in behind them.
Do you want to say anything about any other countries, like with the implementation of the SDGs?
Yes, I think the one I admire most is Finland. So they really have what's called open governance, and they've embedded stakeholders into their government committees and policies, and they're making probably the best progress. So what they're showing is they're number one in the happiness report. I would say they're number one in implementing sustainable development. They're number one on sort of tax levels to achieve this, and what I would call number one in social democracy. And I think all these things go together. So Ireland can be like these Nordic countries. I think it's in us to do it that way, but we still have a good bit to go. What I'd say is, compared to the MDG era, the SDGs is definitely getting more traction across the intergovernmental bodies like the World Bank and the IMF, across civil society, across private sector, across academia in particular. But we're probably only 10% of the way there, though. Like, we're still losing the battle. Like, everyday battles we're still losing. But I think you sense that it is getting more traction, and it is bedding down, and it is quite a good and unique thing. But for it to be completely mainstream, we really still have a long way to go. But as most people point out, there's no plan B with this. Like, for that humanity, we can say, is this a dream? Is it happening in reality? But the thing is, we do have to do this. Like, we have no choice but to do this, or we face a real problem for humanity.